the hidden agendas that impact our lives and uncover the secret societies and the shadowy elite who construct the reality that we are supposed to believe. So be there Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, here on Studio A on Revolution Radio, and learn what's really going down.
Lost a little honey on the lone highway, left me for another on the lone highway. They killed dirty Doc McGee on the lone highway.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Do you feel as if you don't belong? Do you know you were meant for something more? Well, you were. Knowledge of who you are and where you really are from is within your reach. Join Janet Carol Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin as they search for the answers as they open up the Stargate to the cosmos.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to Stargate to the Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Carol Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter, and you're listening to Revolution Radio Studio B. And our special guest today is Michael Goddart. And soon after moving to Marin County in California, just after he turned 11, Michael Goddart started actively searching for the truth about death and how to attain everlasting bliss. He began daily meditation at age 19, and at 21 began to meditate for 2.5 hours daily. For more than 2 decades, he has also been actively developing his sense of knowing and accessing his higher consciousness. Michael took his MFA in creative writing at Bowling Green State University. His work as an international tax consultant and his spiritual quest has taken him to over 50 countries. He has journeyed 13 times to India and also numerous times to England, Greece, Canada, Spain, within the United States, to be one of those rare teachers whom he considers to be fully realized humans. Let me scroll down to his books. Hold on one second here. So he's the author of the recently published In Search of Lost Lives, Desire, Sanskaras, and the Evolution of a Mind and Soul, a winner of the American Book Fest Best Book Award, the Living Now Book Award, the Body, Mind, Spirit Book Award, and the National Indie Excellence Award. His other books include Bliss, 33 Simple Ways to Awaken Further, and Spiritual Revolution, A Seeker's Guide, which the Hollywood Spiritual Film and Entertainment Festival named Best Spirituality Self-Help Book, and a leading Australian bookstore named it one of the best 10 metaphysical books ever written. So there's a much longer bio on Michael and pictures on AquarianRadio.com. Before I bring on Michael, I want to bring on Dr. Sasha Lessin. Aloha, sweetheart. Are you there?
Yes, yeah. And Michael, I'm going to ask you to focus on, you've studied with so many masters about who were really inspiring to you. And I'm particularly interested myself in Prabhupada and Buddha and Jesus.
Okay, Michael, welcome to the show. And what would you like to tell our listeners about you that's beyond your bio?
Aloha. Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. What was your first question? I didn't quite catch it. You wanted me to talk about masters who inspired me?
Yes.
Yes, Sasha, you to tell us about masters who've inspired you, and I want to know, what did I miss in your bio? What more would you like to tell our listeners about you before we start going into the topics?
Well, my life is committed to following a path of self-realization and God-realization. And by self-realization, that means rising to a place spiritually where you know that you are the soul. That is who you are. It's a place, an elevated place beyond the mind. And God realization is literally going back to the Godhead, going through all the increasingly spiritual realms, leaving the mind far behind and merging back in that ocean of love. So that in a nutshell is what my life is all about and what my journey has been through eons of existence. I always wondered about kind of who I had been in the past. When I was 12, I first came across Edgar Cayce, and once I read about reincarnation, I knew automatically that that was true. And I began to wonder about all the distinctive traits and personal qualities and feelings of familiarity I had. But it wasn't until 2013, after some really major surgeries, that I just realized that I could access my past lives. And they started coming back to me one after another. And one of the wonderful things about it is that it showed so much of who I am. What defines me is who I have been in my past lives. Different strong tendencies, feelings of affinity and aversion. I've always felt, for instance, I always felt very familiar about England, and I actually went there for my junior year abroad. But it turned out, for instance, that my last two lives, I was English. So it's just been a wonderful, eye-opening experience. I know a lot of people spend time and effort looking into their genealogy and all their past relatives. What I've been really lucky to find out is actually who I've been on this journey through time. And what I actually found, kind of the main focus of the book is also identifying what I call spiritual evolutionary experiences. So basically, life after life, I was being spiritualized by one particular experience to kind of raise me up more and more. And I tend to talk about our mind as we having a higher mind and a lower mind, basically, and also an habitual mind. And the higher mind is the part that wants to be of service, to be loving, to be good to people. And your lower mind is the mind that's really captive to your senses. It's the mind that really gets involved with the passions, with ego and anger and attachment. So what was happening as I went through my march of lives is that I was being spiritualized so that at a point, basically in my Tibetan life, about 12 lives back, my higher mind became predominant over my lower mind. That was a very important change in my being.
So let me ask you,
yeah.
how many lives do you remember? You're saying how far back was that?
Yeah, I recovered and wrote about 88 past lives, 71 of which were human and 17 animal. And the animal were really key because they represented lives in which I'd been really kind of mean and did things that made me lose my next life as a human. So
you had animal lives in between your human lives? Are you saying that's how it works?
Yeah, I would have animal lives. I would fall back to being an animal. As far as I could tell, what I accessed, I never fell down to being like a bird, which is a lower animal than an animal. I mean, we're considered animals, but we have a kosh, which is discrimination. We can, worship and seek the higher power. So, but also the times between lives were very important, and that's one thing I write about fairly early on in the book. is about what I call my cohort of 7. Actually, when I had a visit in Hawaii, this term kept coming into my mind, cohort of 7, cohort of 7. And that time in Hawaii is when I recovered what that was. My cohort of 7 was really my group of 7 other mind-body entities, and we were like in a class together, kind of going through similar spiritual lessons and experiences. And with this group of mind soul entities, I had the greatest number of incarnations on Earth. I mean, most people I'm familiar with, I had just 1 or maybe 3 or even 5 past lives together. But this group, I had typically over 20 lives together. And we were like seeking together, and we had all kinds of relationships together, family relationships, spousal relationships. And what I found to be really fascinating, Janet. Yes?
Are you involved with any of your cohort of 7 now?
Well, that's just literally what I was getting to. What I found fascinating was that 2 lives ago, when I was an English banker and ended up in India during the Raj, but in that lifetime, all the members of my cohort of 7 were incarnated, and I knew them. And I had joined the Metaphysical Society, if you've ever heard of that, and 2 of them were also there. But this lifetime, also, everybody I knew, and 3 of the members actually were initiated onto my spiritual path. And many of them lived in Sonoma County. 2 were a couple in England, and 1 I met shortly after I became initiated on my current spiritual path in the desert. And, you know, when you meet somebody you've had strong prior lives with, it's just, it kind of makes you stunned for a while, because there is so much you share in common, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And one of the wonderful things of my recovery of past lives is I was able to identify just who these people were in past lives. But I also actually recovered, Janet and Sasha, how many human lives I'd had, which kind of freaks people out. I mean, a lot of people don't really believe in reincarnation, and I hope, you know, people are able to look at my book and even just look at the table of contents where I have the years that I lived each life and where I was. It's nothing I would have written to make up. You know, if I had made these up, they would have been a lot more dramatic and colorful. You know, I would have been a courtesan in a court. I would have done all kinds of crazy things. But many of my lives, I was a teacher, or I was a moneylender, or an administrator. So I had quite a few lives that are very much like who I was this lifetime. This lifetime, my main profession was being a tax accountant, which fits in really well.
Wow. So you've recovered 88.
88 lives.
Go ahead.
But the total of human lives I know I have, including my current one, is 4,137.
And how do you know that number?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually kind of surprised, but I've always had this sort of like seventh sense about numbers. I could look at numbers and add and subtract without thinking, but I have this like perfect intuitive sense of numbers. Like one of the easier things for me about recovering my past lives was actually the years that I lived. And you can see that in the table of contents. But I'm able to kind of access information, and particularly if I'm prompted to, I guess what I have is a channel to my higher consciousness, my higher self, and either the information flows through automatically or I can suss out what I need to know. So, you know, I think we've had, particularly if you're on a spiritual path and you're seeking, you've had a great many human lives. And I lived on 3 planets, including Earth, And by far, Earth has been the toughest, the most challenging, the hardest. This is really kind of the school of hard knocks, I've always felt,
Right.
actually. So, I don't know, go ahead, yes.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to catch some questions here, and then we'll keep going because, I remember about a dozen of my past lives, and I remember my simultaneous lives. I have experiences like at night that I'm going to one of my other lifetimes on another planet. So, and I have a long spiritual practice too. So I'm not as advanced as you are. Obviously, you've got 4,000 of them. But I wanted to know, when I was asking myself in a hypnosis session, my friend was facilitating me, when was my first incarnation? I got an answer. When did you first come to the earth? What made you decide to come to the earth? What was going on, and approximately how long ago was that?
That is one life I wasn't prompted to recover, my first earth life. I did recover the first life in which I began to have spiritual evolutionary experiences. And that was sort of midway through my lives on my first planet, Jorlu, which is just an approximation in English because we had different kind of physical structures and language. But I was a woman with 6 children in that lifetime. A great majority of my lives on the planet Jorlu, I was female, and I think of that as a great advantage because it gave me just a great foundation for being male. I've hardly had any female lives on Earth, literally just 40, and I've never born children on Earth. But being a female on Jorlu, it created a great foundation of empathy and just, all the very positive female qualities. But that is a great question, which I haven't been prompted to ask, and maybe I will, kind of go into a higher state and find out why I was assigned to Earth. But it's all on my path of completing this experience of being human so I can leave. I do feel quite clearly that this is likely my last life in the physical, and I won't be coming back. And I think many people are marked to go back eventually. It may be 2 lives from now. It may be later in this life when you start. But that is sort of the journey through existence. When we issued down from the what I call love source, the source of being, some people call the Lord or God, we came through really to gain experience in the creation, which we've been having plenty of. And since you've recovered 12 of your lives, I'm sure you're quite aware of that.
Great. So this other planet you were on, were you a humanoid form, or what was your form? What did it look like?
Yes, I was humanoid. I had slightly kind of different colored skin. It was actually more peach colored. I was typically taller. There are different races on the different planets, and I did occupy different races, but I was definitely a human, humanoid. I define a human as a being, who has a kosh, the sense of discrimination, or you could, having a third eye. You're able to meditate and withdraw your mind and soul currents to journey in inner spiritual planes. That's really what I call a human. And we all have that capacity.
Sasha, do you have a question or feedback?
Sure.
I indeed do. First, I find, I'm a student of Roger Wilder's. I've studied with him many years, and I've done a lot of this stuff too. And so what I find is that people have contemporary subpersonalities that are resonances of the past lives in which they experience. And if I regress people when I've broken them into their subpersonalities, the different subpersonalities, the inner critic or the pusher or whatever, will have a different set of past lives that reinforce it. And so that there's a resonance for every past life, I would say, at least for the major ones. Michael, do you have sub-selves that resonate still from the experiences they had in the past life, and that you can access the wisdom that they gained in this life?
Well,
that's the first question.
Yeah, how I experience it is that I have pronounced sanskaras, and a sanskara is an impression from a past life. And different sanskaras come to the fore in different lives. Like the three lives that most resonate with me in this life are when I was a Greek philosopher around the 3rd century in the Common Era, and when I was a Carthusian monk 6 lives ago, and when I was a British banker. Those 3 lives are like most present in this life. But what I was saying earlier were all these idiosyncrasies that are present in this life. Each one can be traced back to literally a particular experience in a past life. Like all my life, I've had a very strong aversion. This is kind of strange, but I've had an aversion to Spain and China. And these are 2 things I recovered why that happened, and they relate to specific experiences I went through. And once I recovered it, those experiences, like these aversions, dissolved literally, and I felt fine about it. So, perhaps in your therapy, you also help people dissolve these different characteristics they still may be carrying. I don't know, but I found this very healing to find things that bothered me, but also to find certain talents that I had. Like I've always had a total fascination with statistics, and that harks back to a Swedish life when I was a mathematician and worked as an administrator in an early form of a university. So does that kind of answer your question?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, it really does. You can. In my work, we have an ability to bring before us in the interlife those whom we harmed and those who harmed us, and see what the sanskaras are, and we can negotiate another sanskara, another contract that frees us from the automatic bonds of the old script, as I would call a sanskara. That's and so yeah, I love what you're doing. I understand it too. The other thing I have is about the dualism that's inherent in having a high mind versus a low mind. In my work, particularly with the chakras, I find that just because one chakra is lower than the other, and transcending it doesn't mean you do without it. It just means it's incorporated in something larger. And so when I see the higher lower, it makes me think, is there some way I could embrace both simultaneously and be centered between them?
Oh, well, I just sort of use higher mind and lower mind and actually habitual mind just for convenience in discussing it. I mean, our mind is a vast sphere of activity. You can describe it in terms of weather, of sultry evenings and thunderstorms and all kind, the way there are all kinds of weather in the world. That's the way our minds are. But as we become purified, our higher minds get stronger and stronger, and not ruled as much by kind of the down-pulling passions. I mean, some people can be completely consumed with lust or have toxic ego. Well, that's very much, in the way I discuss it, really an expression of the lower mind. And it's not to, so that's sort of the way I define it for ease of discussion. And by becoming spiritualized, you're strengthening the higher mind, which goes up to kind of what we call the second grand division, which is Trikuti, the higher causal plane. So I don't know if you work with the different planes of existence, like the astral, causal, Parbrahm, that type of thing. But
we certainly have the equivalent that every excursion into pure awareness stays with you, and even if you deal with other areas, you still have always accumulated this spiritual vision. So that's just the Jungian way of saying the same thing you're saying. I really like your framework. I understand it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I have great respect for Jung, and I did work with the Jungian when I was much younger, and it was a very valuable experience, definitely.
So you mentioned the astral plane, and I've been able to astrally project all my life. Are you able to travel astrally?
Well, I don't. I actually don't talk about inner experiences. I can talk about information and knowledge I have, but part of my path is not talking about things I see or experience inside, because that, frankly, for me, can stoke the ego, which is something I need to guard against. So that's kind of part of my path, is not to talk about inner stuff, because I've had friends who've had the most extraordinary spiritual experiences, and then I find out after the fact that they talked about them, and then the experiences stopped. They were taken away from them. So that's sort of my experience with friends who have had and talked about the really extraordinary spiritual experiences of traveling within.
What do you think would make him be taken away? I would think that would be a sense of joy.
Because, we have a highly ascended master who looks out for our spiritual benefit, and who may allow us to have experiences or gifts. But the main thing is, he doesn't want to stoke our egos. So we have a very active spiritual teacher. I actually identify in my book when he first came into my existence. It was a number of lives ago when I was a Swedish boy who died of disease when I was 10 years old. He kind of began to look after me, look over me. And I felt his presence this lifetime when I almost stepped into onrushing traffic and could have easily been killed, but at that time it was almost as if a powerful arm yanked me back off the street, back onto the curb. So once I discovered my path, I actively felt this presence with me all the time, and that really became my teacher. Who really will serve as my guide on the inner journey.
So Michael Newton Institute does the Life Between Lives research. So he talks about we all have our own personal guide. We have a council, and we have the group that we tend to reincarnate with. We also deconstruct our lifetimes that we had together, that we just finished, and how they correlate with our past lifetimes. Does that resonate with your research?
To a great extent, particularly having that relates very much to my cohort of 7, and we've definitely had different spiritual guides and teachers. In fact, when I've come incarnated for a special reason, like to be a mind reader, to be a creative visualizer, there would be training in between lives with a particular teacher. So that does resonate. He's done really great work, but what's interesting is that it kind of makes life on Earth sound much more, I call it like an easy adult education course. I really think our lives here have been much rougher than the lives he's recovered, at least those that are in his book. He may recover lives that have been very traumatic, but maybe they're not written about. I think we're very blessed. I mean, I don't know that much about either of you, but I think we're extremely blessed and have wonderful lives. But we really don't know what we've done in the past and what our next lives will be. It's just that I don't know if you subscribe to the theory of karma, but I very much know that we have a huge reserve of karma, and that's what keeps coming us back and keeps us coming back to the earth. And with each new life, your destiny is really formed out of your reserve of karma, and it is set that way. But I do resonate very much with what he writes about, yes.
So you reserve a karma so that it accumulates over lifetimes. Do you ever get rid of karma? Do you ever resolve it? Or is it just always with you?
Well, you're definitely always resolving it as you go through it, and you're also creating new karma. The meditation I do is really to invoke the grace of the higher power, the love source, to dissolve the karma. You really can't leave the mind entirely, if that's what you want to do, until all your debts or karmas are paid off. And that's really the path I'm on now, is to really resolve your debts. If you don't have any attachments to the physical, you're not going to come back. By the same token, there are people who do wonderful, wonderful works of giving and helping people. Well, that's creating really, really good karma. So they may die and then they may go to a heaven for, you can't really talk in terms of time, but it could be, for the equivalent of many millennia. But then eventually that really good karma is going to peter out and they're going to have a new incarnation. So I mean,
do we ever get out of that cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth? Do we go to
I'm sorry, I missed. Could you repeat that? I missed that.
Okay. Do we ever get out of the birth, life, death, rebirth cycle, coming into human earth physical incarnations? I heard that this is a prison planet of a sense, and that it's really hard to evolve out of this continuous cycle that lasts thousands and thousands of years. Although the Newton Institute information does say eventually you can, cycle out. He used the color system. I haven't read this in a while, so I don't remember every nuance of the information. But one of the things, he said that once you get to a certain level, you can go back and forth between the levels, between the dimensions, like the Buddha and the Christed consciousness. And then some people come down here on a mission that they're coming from, and I mean, use of course higher or lower, but we're limited by language, but a higher vibratory frequency, like where apparently Jesus and all these ascendant masters are. And some of those can come down into the lower densities on a mission in order to accelerate consciousness for all humanity. So anyway, I kind of resonate with that information. And I wondered, how do you eliminate negative karma? What's the best system that you've discovered?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say I do resonate very much with what you're saying, that there are some evolved souls who come down to help out, and keep the earth hopefully from completely blowing up. But in terms of eliminating karma, the method or meditation that I subscribe to is meditating on what Jesus called the Word, the Greeks called Logos. All the fully realized saints have talked about this audible life stream through time. They've given it many names. In my books, I mention a number of the names. I mean, there are names, from Islam Hindu names and Sikh names, but it's the Shabadun. So this is basically the very stuff of life. It's the emanation of God. So by meditating on that, listening to it and seeing it, this is really what burns karma, what eliminates karma. So that is the path I believe that Jesus taught. Guru Nanak, if you've heard of him, Kabir Sahib, Rumi, Shams Tabriz, all kinds of saints throughout time. I ascribe to the reality that there's always a perfect living master on earth. There's at least one. And he comes for his sheep, or she comes for her sheep, for those initiates who are meant to begin their journey back. So this is sort of kind of like the secret of the ages that, religions kind of came after the masters came, after the teachers came. But they all came with this message about the Holy Ghost, the Word, the Shabadun. It's been given thousands of names through time, but this is what is keeping us alive. It's what's animating us. And when you journey within spiritually, it's really on what we call the sound current. So if I'm happy to give further elaboration if you'd like.
Okay. Josh, do you have anything you want to say before further elaboration?
I'm sorry, I didn't. What?
Sasha, go ahead.
Let's see if I it's okay. Here it goes. It's an interesting way that I like to deal with karma, because I'm a transcendental existentialist, so to speak. Is I feel it immediately, not in a past or in a present. Immediately, when you do something that's feels right, it feels good immediately. If you do something junk, and you understand the karmic thing that you did, you can sometimes rectify it immediately. The more you're in the present, and honoring all the resonances, of course, from your past lives and your, but the more you're really in the present, everything will take care of itself from my perspective. So it's your karma to fully experience your now. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, that's coming from a very conscious. That's coming from a very conscious place. Most people aren't remotely conscious of what effect their actions have. People can say things that are extremely hurtful and have no idea, or if they do, they don't care. So you're coming from a very conscious place of, probably. There's actually whole paths of like Kriyaman yoga, I believe, is all about not creating any new karmas and not taking any life higher than plant life, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you found yourself in animal form,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
When you found yourself back in animal form, what animals did you incarnate as?
Well, all kinds of animals, often as rabbits, and I just recovered those I wrote about. The most recent animal life, before I became a human, time after time, I was a female cow in Africa and gave birth to 3 calves. But most of the ones I mentioned, I was a dog or a rabbit. One life, I was a skunk. That was a very tough life. I was starving much of the time and died in a trap. And some of the dog lives were wonderful and some were pretty bad. So those were just the lives I wrote about, because they had to do with actions I took which were mean. that made me lose human life. And some of them were, might seem fairly minor, like one life in early Europe. I really overly disciplined my very young daughter and made her go without food for a day and sit in her damp clothes. And that was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back that made me come back. It's just, it's really kind of interesting. I mean, from seemingly almost minor things that I did to really horrific things. The first life that came back to me from when I was on another planet was when I was a ruler, and that's very present in my samskaras. That was what I call a notable life, which I haven't really talked about yet. But a notable life is a life that is kind of writ larger than life. It's a life that has greater consequences, either positive or negative. Well, this life I was a ruler on the planet Vizine, which is the planet on which I had the greatest number of lives. And it was really a fairly peaceful planet, but I started in a necessary war, which caused the death of over 260,000 men, women, and children. And so rather than coming back as an animal, I went to what I call a bespoke hell, a custom hell, and I was there for seemed like an eternity, paying off some of that karma, not all of it. So there are two lives I write about where I ended up in a hell, where my actions were so egregious and so bad that I really had to go to a special place of reformation. I really, hell is one of those words that's fraught with emotion and meaning. So I really call them stages or states of reformation, where you're going through some good character building, but also doing a lot of suffering to pay off the bad karma you incurred.
So what kind of suffering do you endure when you're in a hell scenario?
Well, it really
do they
depends.
Have fire and
yeah, it really depends on the life, the actions that gave rise to it, and it's something. When I was in the midst of recovering the lives, I knew what they were, but it's just so horrifying that my mind tends to repress it, to go back, to not want to go back to it. But think of having your bones crushed constantly. That kind of comes to my mind now. It's just kind of repeated suffering, although you're not in the physical, though. You're in a state where you still have matter, but you're not in this heavier physical world. And that went on and on for a long time, for a seeming eternity. So I did recover that I had 12 lives in which my actions led to going to a hell. Only one on Earth when I really got caught up in greed, in which I was living in kind of very early settlement on the continent of Atlantis. And this is not in my book. I was just really wondering if I had any lives which led to a hell on Earth. And I really did some actions that made the people in my settlement suffer, and it tipped the balance, and I had to go to a hell after that lifetime.
That's very interesting. Were you ever anybody that on Earth that we would know who they were historically?
I would say no, although probably my best-known life was 4 lives ago when I was an actor and a playwright in Denmark. It was during the time of Comte de Saint-Germain. Have you heard of Saint-Germain by any chance?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry? Saint-Germain?
Yes, I've heard of Saint-Germain.
He was he actually ties into what you were talking about, like an ascended soul who comes back occasionally to help people, and he supposedly helped, I think, write our Declaration of Independence. So he was my contemporary in Denmark, although I had no idea he was there. But I was fairly well known in that lifetime, and I was an orphan in that lifetime and grew up in an orphanage. So that whole life was all about getting love, experiencing love. And the way I channeled that was to become an actor and just revel in the applause and the appreciation of my audiences. But what I find really interesting was my next life, I was the son of immigrants in post-revolution America, and I became an architect. And that's when I really began to search for a teacher. And the one teacher I focused on was the Comte of Saint-Germain, and I did everything I could to find anything I could written about him. In fact, I took special trips to Philadelphia. I lived in early Baltimore, to bookstores to find anything I could about him. So that's when I was like really actively searching for a teacher on this earth. And it happened to be Saint Germain, who I knew nothing about the life prior. But by then, his teachings and writings about him had been published to some extent. And then this lifetime, one of my dear friends who was a psychic introduced me to him, and it was just utterly familiar. And I think she encouraged me to look into him, but I totally had this feeling, been there, done that. There was no need to look into it. So I had this sense and feeling of completion. And then when I recovered my past lives, this made total sense. So that was really one of the joys of recovering them and all these specific details, that everything made sense. And of course, when you rise within and you can see all your lives, everything will make sense. And but then you'll just want to be absorbed more and more in the bliss and the love of the sound current, the word, the Shabad.
So how do you access your past lives? What's your system?
Well, it's something I can kind of summarize, but not really describe, because to really understand it, you would have to co-occupy my consciousness. But it's just sort of being actively in a channel with my higher knowing. There can be all kinds of triggers, like, reading something, hearing something. The first time I saw the trailer for 12 Years a Slave, it was really heavy, and I thought, gee, this is an important film, I want to see it. And then I happened to be watching television, and the trailer came on again, and then immediately I knew I'd been a slave. And so I began to suss out, which is a term I use, kind of interact. It's sort of like I have two consciousnesses within me. I have my everyday consciousness and I have my higher consciousness. And it's sort of like where we can communicate between each other. So from that trigger of seeing the trailer the second time, and I had no idea the first time that anything would come of it, I recovered 3 lives when I was a slave in Atlantis. But at that time I recovered a particular life, and it was when I became a slave when I was just kind of a mature young man for the first time on my own. And I write about what a horribly emotional time that was when I was, so many cultures, slavery has been quite common, and it didn't necessarily have to do with race or class. It's just the ruler had this right to co-opt people to be slaves. And the 4 lives I write about when I was a slave were completely different. I died at very different times. I did different types of work. So, I think so much of our experience in the physical is all about diversity. We are experiencing everything under the sun. Hopefully, we're on a trajectory where we're evolving toward the light, toward spirituality. And there's such great forces on the earth now for people who are moving toward the light. It's sort of like the forces of positivity and negativity are stronger than ever. And we're on a wild ride, particularly the last few years.
Right. And so if you do a journey back through time, I've looked at many of my past lives. I've journeyed with other people, facilitating them in regressions. My girlfriend and I would just, every time we had a break from work at Penn State, we would just hypnotize each other and keep going back and getting all kinds of I have no idea what was real or true, but we were accessing all this information that was way beyond our current knowledge and information. So I guess if you had a lot of time, you could study everything and, verify as much as you can. Most of our history is not written. So, Sasha, let's go back to you because we're coming up.
What I seem to be triggered is a past life that I had, and it's so relevant to this time, and I've been meditating on it several times. And I was in a shuttle, a small village in Belarus, and my elders were the older guys were all. They were uppity, thought they were better than the Russians, and I kept saying, "Hey, we got to make friends with these people," and no one would listen to me. And finally, there was a program, and I had to leave with my family. It goes on a big drama and so forth. But I learned from that. What I learned from that is you got to get along with your neighbors. You got to respect your neighbors, and that has stuck with me and has been a part of the script that's part of my life that's relevant right now.
Oh, that's fascinating because I recovered a life in what is now Poland, where I was in a settlement, which I guess you could call a shuttle, full of Orthodox Jews. And our family was really kind of on the outs with the community. And I had pretty irresponsible parents. But that was really kind of one of my hardest recent lives. And I ended up committing suicide. Which is a horrible thing to do. I went out to, I couldn't get anybody to marry me. I actually had a matchmaker who gave up on me. And I had made my living by being a translator. Things were better when I was younger and more attractive, and I would translate from French to Yiddish and Polish to Yiddish, and I would get a little bit of money that way. But finally, I was just totally bereft, and I finally went out shortly after, I think it was my 40th birthday, and let myself freeze to death in the snow. So I really lost out on the opportunity for more spiritual growth, which was to experience hardship and overcome it in deprivation. So that life was all about deprivation, and unfortunately, I couldn't take it. I wasn't strong enough.
Wow! So if I was to go on with my story, is when the Russians were coming for the pogrom, as they call murdering people in Belarus, and I got my family, which was a wife and a daughter, and we were crossing the Caucasus to escape, and a great bear came out of the woods. And all I had was great big sticks, and I had the child and the wife go on, and I stalled the bear until it killed me. And that was suicide too. It was altruistic suicide, and I felt good about it.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, you were protecting your family, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a suicide. Although, I mean, you were there, I wasn't. But that's very dramatic. And do you know about what period of time that was?
Oh, yes, indeed I do. It was in the 1880s, 1870s, back there.
Okay, wow. See how different lives could be. I mean, 1870 is an important year for me because that's when I arrived in Bombay. I was assigned overseas as a banker. So, and there you were fleeing, in a pogrom and trying to escape with your family. So that's fascinating. Yeah, fascinating.
I have one from that period too. I remember being under the table. Lincoln was dying, and I want to say a little drummer boy. I might have been one of the Lincoln children playmates, because I know they had some playmates so I might be able to track down my name. But I remember looking over, and everybody was fussing over Lincoln, who was passing, and I had these toy soldiers with this other little boy, and we were keeping ourselves occupied. And I looked up just in time, and I saw Lincoln's soul exit his body, and I saw it very clearly, just like normal life, and yet nobody seemed to notice it. And then shortly after, they reacted, and they went, "Oh, he's dead." So we covered that part, and being aware of our time's going to happen in about a minute. But I went forward in time, and I was a full adult male, and I had a wife and 3 children, and I remember, having a picnic or something in a gazebo it was very picturesque. Swans in the little lake, and it was very beautiful seeing that. So I remember those 2 things. But I had a friend in this life and time, and I told her about it, and she says, "Oh, I was the woman. I was your wife." And I went, "What?" So, that's the first time I had somebody remembering being part of one of my past lives.
So, if I heard you correctly, Janet, did you say you were one of the playmates of President Lincoln's children?
Yes, and I probably could find out which one I was.
Oh, and did this also take place in the White House?
Yes. Yes,
How
I was
fascinating.
some kind, yeah. And so I started to research it. I haven't really tracked it down, but yes, he did have some playmates.
She's related to the Secretary. You're related to the Secretary of the Navy. You're related, you're direct descendant to the Lincoln's Secretary of the Navy, his number 1 person.
Right. So then I found out in this life I'm genetically related. So I might have been, genetically related even to my past life form. So anyway, that was kind of
that's
interesting.
true. Or it could be, non-genetically related. But that's a really wonderful life to recover.
Yeah, and I did that after a year of meditating every night at the same time for 15 minutes after going monthly or weekly to a 3-hour meditation. So meditation helps you recover your past lives.
Absolutely, yeah. When I would, some of the things I recovered were
Wait. Run right now. Sorry, we're breaking news. So everyone back here. Bye.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
The future is uncertain. I know this. Death is inevitable. I know this. But one thing is certain. As free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion. And as the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning, and tell the masters no more. And this is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction. on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically autonomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday at 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
Syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look. It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live, Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Kerr Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter, and you are listening to Revolution Radio Studio B. Our guest is Michael Goddart. We're having a very interesting talk about reincarnation, but before we get back to our show and our guests, I'd like to remind you to go up to the donation button up there on the top left tab on revolution.radio, and you can make your one-time donation. And then if you want to do a recurring donation, go to patreon.com, and you can set up your recurring donation. We do thank you very much because your donation allows us to stay on radio and pay the bills. Thank you very much. So before we go back, I want to first, Sasha, make sure you're back and sound check, and do you have anything you want to add to the conversation?
Yes, well, I do that. One of the interesting ways of looking at past life access is the animus mundi, that everything in the Akashic records are available to us, and whatever we resonate on, they're all our past lives and our future lives and our contemporary lives, and we access those that are most salient to us, both karmically and at this very moment, and it's always the same. And I just wondered what you think of that, Michael.
Well, I think that's I do resonate with that to a large extent. I actually have not, as far as I know. I mean, I don't consciously access the Akashic records, but I very much like what how you're describing it. I kind of work on more of an informational level, I guess. That's the way my mind works at this time. And it's just sort of like instant knowing, automatic knowing. So, I may be accessing the Akashic records without really actually seeing them or being aware of them. Because everything comes through absolutely specifically. And if something isn't true, it's absolutely not true. And I can't write about it. I have to keep delving until I get, the rest of the information I'm trying to get.
It's so interesting. It's like Pomerantz said, we can all know everything without really ever knowing why or how it works, but we know.
Right. Well, we have that connection. We have that divine connection. So, we're all potential gods. We all have that spark within us. It's just a question of purifying and uplifting our consciousness.
Okay, are you complete? Because I have something I want to say. Either of you
the one thing that's really disturbing to me is that are some people more complete than others, and I want to see. Part of me values everybody's light so much, and I can't believe that there's some people are higher because they meditate, and other people that just work ain't. Because I believe everybody's light is got to shine too. That's where I'm coming from.
Well, yeah. Everybody has the divine within them, and I certainly don't want. I hope that wasn't taken as any kind of judgment. But we're all treading different paths. Some of the most elevated people may commit acts which could bring them back to animal life or hell. We can never judge because we don't really know the whole history of the person. And that's why it was so gratifying to me to recover these particular lives, because they explain so much of who I was this lifetime. But we're on the journey, and it's really all perfect, and it's actually very individual, except we do often have these groups of souls we're in touch with, that we're learning lessons together with.
So, Michael, I want to run past an odd scenario, and maybe you can give me some better understanding on it. I was working at Penn State University. It was either 89 or 90. I was at the Department of Agriculture, and I worked in the back on the computers, and someone came back and said, "We've got our new receptionist. Go out and meet her." And so I took a break, and I went past, and when I met Michelle, I was just struck by something, and I said to her out loud, do you believe in reincarnation? And she said, yes. And then I started asking her, well, how did you die? Was it suicide or were you killed? And so she started describing to me, well, this was all, no more than that, right? She's telling me how she was murdered, and then she was Marilyn Monroe. And it was the most amazing story. And I just was totally engrossed, and I listened to her, and I fought back tears, and then I excused myself when I went to the bathroom, and I went into one of the stalls, and I just started bawling. Because when I was 9 years old, when I heard of Marilyn Monroe's death, I was up at the farm with my mother and her brother and his family, and I just started sobbing uncontrollably when Marilyn Monroe died when I was 9 years old. And so I said to myself, this woman is really Marilyn Monroe, and I'm not sure why, I love her so much, but it makes sense in terms of a soul family. And of course, we became best friends, and we were the ones that just kept regressing each other. But she looked like her. She walked like her. She talked like her. She said, I've been entering Marilyn Monroe contests since I was a little girl, and I keep winning. Now, I've met other people that have said they've been Marilyn Monroe. So would an advanced soul be able to send fractals into more than one person? Can there be 10 Marilyn Monroes that really were? And Michael Newton Institute says that advanced souls can send their energy into more than one form, And it's possible for you to meet yourself in this lifetime, right? So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. I think it may be possible because everything is really possible in the creation. I didn't recover that particular experience. So you're saying whether an advanced soul can kind of extend into more than one life. I think that's possible, but I didn't come up with it personally. I am curious, though, as to when she was born, your friend.
She was born in, we did the time, let's see, so Marilyn died in 63. She was born in 64, like June, she was cancer, June something, 1964.
Okay, so in terms of chronologically, it's definitely possible.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
well, she could be. I mean, Marilyn Monroe, I would probably call that a notable life because it was such a larger-than-life life. And if she incarnated immediately after this notable life, it could be very present for her. So that is quite possible. Definitely.
Right. Yeah, it just permeated from her. The other thing we uncovered doing all these, we shared, went back and forth, I would be regressed and then she would be regressed, is that she was a reincarnation junkie. She would just go out and she loved living lives. That's what she said. And because I said, mine are few and far between, and she was like, boom, 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 boom. Have you ever encountered that people are just reincarnation junkies?
Well, and then she did come back right away. What I found is that I had a life when I was an orphan in Macedonia, which I call the pivotal life, and that life determined that I would only have human incarnations from then on. What happened is that I began to incarnate much more readily with fewer years. So rather than 100 or 300 years in between human lives, I would typically have 12 or 13 lives. 12 or 13 years between lives. But I think, it's definitely quite plausible that somebody who really wants as much experience on this plane as possible, that they're in and out all the time. And of course, time is different, but, the 12 or 13 years would have been a totally different experience wherever I was between lives. So definitely there are people who constantly, you can come back, basically immedately. But often in the earlier lives, there were really big gaps. I was doing whatever between lives, being in the great school of spirit, I would say.
So, and also, do you tend to incarnate in different parts of the planet, or do you find yourself coming like several times back to back, like say to England or something?
Well, yeah, it was very much more geographically oriented. I mean, a great number of my lives were in Europe, and although I had a few in Asia, when I was a Lemurian, this was not during Lemurian times, but Atlantean times, but I call myself a Lemurian because I was typically 70% Lemurian stock. I was incarnating in what is now Indonesia, or what is now submerged parts of close to Indonesia. So there is a geographical connection. I mean, we tend to go where our attachments are, but you also go where you're meant to have connections and karma with certain people. I mean, there are so many people from my high school who came on the same path. It's just uncanny. And one of them in particular, I was searching with consciously when we were freshmen. So it wasn't a coincidence that we both went to the school. I mean, the first person I really met in California when we moved here when I was 10 was my 5th grade teacher. And he was really the first person I got to know, from California. Well, many decades later, I went out to brunch with a group of friends, and there he was fellow initiate on my path. And he looked out after me at the last day of school on a school picnic. This kind of ruffian kid tried to choke me, and he was, luckily I escaped, but he was very comforting, and he was really a wonderful man. So this is somebody, I mean, I don't think anything is by accident. And we have spirit guides, one or more, who really help us along the way.
I want to pass the talking back to Sasha. What more would you like to say or add?
There's the one past life, animal life that kept coming back to me was this time when I was so into it, I thought I was a horse. And I thought I would drink, I got thirsty, I would drink water like a horse did, and I almost drowned myself. The horses have to put their whole mouth in the, I tried it like a horse and I almost drowned myself. So it's good to have a sitter while you're doing deep work.
Actually, the first life I recovered in Atlantis was what I call the horse communer life. I worked at a university and I was like a horse whisperer, I guess you could call that, and I could communicate with horses. But I do know I've had many lives as horses where I was really cruelly treated by humans, beaten and killed for food. But I had that one life, which is a fairly recent Atlantean life. I was just, in communion with horses. And that was a very special life I recovered. And the first one from Atlantean times. But so you recovered this, apparently this life when you were a horse, or more than one life. So, a horse.
Yeah, and it was just like, and I love to run. I still do. I run. I feel like a horse.
Yeah, well, I did a lot of running in that life. With horses, that was sort of my main means of travel, although I did have a solar-powered vehicle at that time, but I used it rarely, only for longer trips, but I mainly got around by running. And actually, speaking of running, one life, I actually worked as a runner. The life in Tibet, I worked several years delivering mail, when the mail carriers would kind of get into this otherworldly trance where you could just run, great distances over all kinds of rocks and obstacles. And that life I actually came back to me when I was in the middle of driving one day on the freeway, and I kind of blacked out for 10 minutes when that came back to me. But the reason I want to bring that up is the next life I was like an art student in Macedonia in Europe, and I used to run everywhere. And it was really unusual, and people would give me strange looks. Well, that was a sanskara, a past impression from the life immediately prior, when I had a time when I was delivering mail and packages in Tibet.
And I have a horse reference. That's great. So so I had, I guess, a cover of, it came from a previous incarnation. When I was a little girl, I used to go on the back porch. I'd take all my clothes off, and my mother would come and yell at me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Mommy, I'm a horse." And, "Well, put your clothes on." "But, Mommy, horses don't wear clothes, and I'm a horse." And I remembered running. So I don't think I was a domestic horse. I think I was somewhere on the plains just running free. My whole life was free. So anyway, I had to stop doing it because I escaped out the front door one time. And so I was on the back porch. It was okay, but she kept wanting me to wear clothes, and I ran out the front door and down the street. And then I think she was mad at me. I stopped after that. I stopped identifying with my horse life.
Yeah. That's a great story.
My mother said, Roy Rogers wouldn't do that. I said, "Mom, I'm not Roy Rogers. I'm Trigger."
You're peeing in the yard, huh? Yeah. All right. So I want to go over. Do you have the chapters of your book so we can kind of? I don't have the outline of your book. Can you tell us what the chapters are of this book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What I did was really, I mean, different parts came out at different times. At first, it was just, from triggers, I would get specific information. And then one day I realized I could basically know whatever I wanted to know. So there are like 54 chapters, and they basically go back in time. So let me read the first 7 lives when I had, each life was an important spiritual evolutionary experience. So the first chapter, before the first chapter is sort of a little scenario, which was really the first time I had a specific recovery and wrote about it, is, yes, I met a saint 2 lives ago. Then the first chapter is English spiritual seeker and co-owner of Office Supply Company when I lived 1894 to 1937. And I was very, very lucky to escape World War II. And by the way, going through COVID, I've been recalling going through the Spanish flu, which I survived. Although ironically, like 19 years later, I did surprisingly die of a flu on my own. Chapter 2 is British banker, 1831 to 1883, and that's when I lived for 3 years in India, in Bombay, and also in the Caribbean as a banker. Then Baltimore architect, 1779 to 1819. Danish playwright actor, 1710 to 1765. Indian disciple and business owner, which I call the happiest life, 1650 to 1705. Slovenian Carthusian monk, I mentioned this life, 1583 to 1638. 7th chapter is Prague priest, 1523 to 1569. That was a very interesting life. I was there pretty much during the golden age of Prague. And then we go to the life I mentioned briefly, Swedish boy, 1506 to 1516. And that's when I died at 10 years old, but it's also when I began to come under the protection of my current teacher, my current guide. And actually, I'm really kind of fond of all my last 12 lives. From there, we go to Cambridge biologist, 1430.
Wait.
Sure.
This is the second time you've alluded to your teacher. Who's your teacher?
He is Huzur Maharaji, who left the physical in 1990.
Huzur Maharaji, is that right?
Huzur, Maharaji. I can spell that for you if you'd like.
I would, yes.
Yeah, capital. There are different spellings for Huzur. I spell it with a U, but most people spell it capital Hazur, and then Maharaj, Maharaj, then capital Ji. And he was head of the organization and colony in Beas, India.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time I visited the colony, I was 24, and I wasn't interested in being a tourist, really, but I had this compelling desire to go to Agra, as the first of this line of saints or masters was Swamiji, and he was in Agra. And I went there, and I was just overcome with joy and elation and feelings of familiarity. And that's really the first thing I recovered when I specifically began to recover the lives is being there and meeting him when I was the British banker. And the first year I was in Bombay, they had recently completed the railroads, and I was able to take a train trip to Agra, and I stayed with a British compatriot. And instead of seeing the Taj Mahal or the Agra Fort, I just had this intuitive urge, which I hadn't even thought about before I left, but it came to me on the train that maybe there's a Swami I could meet. So I asked my host, who was very polite, and he had no idea what I was talking about, but then he remembered that he had an employee who had a teacher. So this employee of this British subject arranged for the meeting, and so I had a wonderful interview for nearly an hour and a half with an interpreter. So that was sort of like the best thing that I recovered, because I'd always been drawn to this teacher. So many people on my path are drawn to the master or teacher of our current teacher, but I never felt any connection. I was drawn to the first of the line. I just was overcome with these amazing feelings of mysticism and elation. So it all came to be true. I mean, it all confirmed these feelings I'd had for years. And that was the first thing I really recovered. And then, of course, I recovered that this is something I worked on between lives. My ability to traverse time was something I worked on with teachers inside between lives. So this didn't just happen. I had preparation.
So, Michael, I have two questions. First question is how did you get the timeline? You were born and died. How did you recover that information?
It's just that I know exactly what years, and I could even get the month and days. In fact, many of my lives, particularly the recent ones, I know what month I was born in. It's just that I mean, the only image that comes to mind is like the Wheel of Fortune when you turn the wheel, and it's just, it'll either stop on the right number or not. I just know exactly what the year was, and I could get it down to the day. It's just something I know, and I guess this is some skill I learned between lives, because I remember one of my lives when I kind of misused my powers of being a mind reader. I was stripped of those powers. This is from my first planet, when I was supposed to be bringing harmony to people. There was one instance when I misused those powers, and I was stripped of those. And when I came back, I didn't have them. So I do believe we have a lot of preparation between lives, but most of us are not meant to remember anything between lives. We're just supposed to go on life after life. But the fact that you're seeking, to me, is the key thing, because you're seeking after truth, you're seeking to awaken further. So that's a very wonderful place to be in.
So
it's really interesting if you go to a episode that you actually lived, and you go back there and you say, shift your consciousness from your own embodiment consciousness to that of your significant other who you're interacting with, and you can start to open up anything you've already experienced even more deeply by just this device of realizing you were one with the consciousnesses that you contacted in that other life too.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to summarize it. It's really more of a knowing. I mean, obviously some things I go through in experience, like when I first recovered that I was a ruler and I was responsible for all those deaths. I just kind of curled myself into a fetal ball and begged for more forgiveness. And also the suicide when I was in Poland, that's something I experienced. But the fact is I had experienced it to some extent before, shortly after I was initiated, I was a student at Cal, and a good girlfriend of mine had some pretty wealthy friends who had a beautiful chalet up in Tahoe. And we went there. I was invited. And I didn't ever have done any downhill skiing, nor did I want to learn. But I decided I would go snowshoeing. So I went off all by myself in March during spring break. And I was just sort of hypnotically drawn to sit in the snow and stay there. Well, that was harking back to my suicide in that Polish life. I just felt, gosh, it'd be just so easy to stay here and die. But luckily I didn't. I remembered that this was not a good idea. You never want to commit suicide. So there's so many clues of who we've been. But it's just an exact knowledge. Like my visual sense is not that well developed. I mean, I have pictures of who I look like when I was an alien, and I know details, like what color was my hair and my skin and my height, but I don't really, I have had visual movies, for instance, in Recovering Lives, but those are automatic. Those I don't really, I can't catalyze those visual movies. They're just sort of triggered when something happens, like I see somebody and then I forget about them from past life, and then all of a sudden I see what we were doing in a past life, and that's just automatic. So it's really a combination of having these automatic triggers, but yet being able to kind of unpack the lives and know whatever I want to.
I find not just what you see or not, but if you can also ask your body, you can say, body, what are you experiencing now? And the body can talk too. So you can get a kinesthetic report. Each sense can give you a different kind of report that can deepen the experience.
Yes, I mean, one of the experiences I recovered was auditory. I got a new soundtrack where angels fear to tread. And as soon as I was hearing the soundtrack, which is about these, English relatives going down to Italy to rescue their brother, I forget exactly who the relative was, from a marriage they didn't want, I realized I'd done the same thing with my younger brother in England when I went down to the south of France. So that brought that back immediately, and that was just from hearing the soundtrack. So that was like an auditory trigger that I knew what had happened, and I unpacked it and unraveled it, and I literally prevented the marriage, which turned out to be for a good thing, because he ended up having a happier marriage afterwards. So anything can trigger. I mean, reading, smells, hearing, visual, like seeing the trailer for 12 Years a Slave. And it had nothing to do with the American South. What I recovered was the Atlantean slave lives. So, but I came in, I believe I was meant to write this, and these triggers were just helpful things to get me going.
So you mentioned something about you were in between lives, you were doing something with time. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
In between lives, you said you were doing something with time. You were learning a skill in between lives.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I didn't delve into this in much detail, but I was practicing, the best way to describe it is traversing time, being able to go across time without any barriers, from one life to the next. And that was all to aid me in accessing time. So that was really kind of taken care of and mastered between lives, because I had that capability this time.
Yeah, I had a dream about 2 months ago, I'd say now. And it's like I popped awake in the middle of the dream, but I was still had my eyes closed. And I said, what am I doing? And so I was taking the fabric of time and space, and I was taking this, I would take it literally with my one finger and my thumb, and I could grab the whole piece of time and space and just pull it over, from the left to the right, and then I would go and grab another one and pull from the right to the left, and I was restructuring the cosmos. I said, what in the world am I doing? And like my guide said, oh, you're a Time Lord. You're fixing the timeline. And I went, what? And it felt really real. It's like, sometimes you go, oh, that's a dream. That's a stupid dream. That's not real. I woke up and I was like in shock. I said, oh, that was real, but I don't understand it. So when you mentioned something about you're traversing across time, and I think I was in like my higher self realm, and for some reason that was information was something I needed to know about what's going on now. Have you had anything like that where you're getting bleed through from past lives into this line, into the relevant?
I'm sorry, have I had anything like that?
Like that?
Not like kind of that. Not really that graphically. All I know is that I worked with a teacher, and this was something I was meditating on and practicing to do to be able to access where I want to time-wise.
Right.
So time has not been a barrier. I know the years I lived and died. I know years when significant events happened that I needed to write about.
Well, I'm going to try your trick to access the years because it's confusing. I know, like that one event with being the little boy watching Lincoln passing, I can recover that. So maybe I could backtrack and go, okay, I was 9 years old or 10 years old, and so I can probably figure out.
It's really a question of developing your intuition. And actually, I did a lot of developing intuition this lifetime when I needed to really intuit literally every spoonful of food I'd eat because of the surgery I had. So you can develop your intuition, which I also call your sense of knowing, really well. So you know what to do in any present moment, and also what rings true. I mean, you can ask your higher self, your higher consciousness, if, let's say, you identified certain friends of the Lincoln children, you could ask your higher consciousness intuitively whether that was you. But the thing is, if you found the right one, it's like a light bulb could go on. So definitely, we all have this intuition, higher sense of knowing, which we can develop. We all have that capability.
Now, back in the 80s, there were these writers that would write about their past lives, and they had such incredible detail about, like medical practices of ancient times, and so I can't remember her name. I read her whole series of these stories. Based
are you
on
talking about Ruth Montgomery?
It wasn't Ruth Montgomery, and hers was more factual, but it was a contemporary of hers. But it was, oh man. And I don't have any of these books because I've moved, and of course everything.
Yeah, and of course Edgar Cayce wrote about many medical, he was helping people with illnesses quite a bit.
Well, this is a female writer, and she wrote about, all kinds of things like.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, but her name escapes me too at the moment.
And then so people said, who were scientifically minded, said, how did you know that's what we're uncovering in our digs and stuff about how the medical was and this and that? And she's writing about it with such vivid detail. It was obvious she lived this, that she had knowledge way beyond her current life. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes. Yeah. All kinds of people have psychic or intuitive abilities that you'd never guess from knowing kind of who they are and what they do in their worldly life. My professional life, I was a tax accountant, which is a completely different sphere. So we are much more than we appear to be.
So what did you think of Ruth Montgomery? And I discovered both of them, Edgar Cayce and Ruth Montgomery. And Edgar really excited me, and I went down and looked into all the biblical references, and then I started fighting with my family when I was 12 years old about, the references in the Bible that were cut out and all that stuff. That was my childhood, fighting with my family. You guys are crazy. Yes, there's reincarnation in the Bible. Here's where it was cut out. Anyway, what did you think about Edgar's information and Ruth Montgomery? Do you think Edgar Cayce is David Wilcox?
Yeah, I met him actually some years ago. I think it's a great possibility. I haven't done anything to confirm it either way, but it's definite possibility. I had a very good contact with him. I enjoyed meeting him enormously. I wish I'd had a chance to meet Ruth Montgomery because, I read her as a teenager, and she was so much fun to read. It was so interesting. But the thing is, people who channel, most of the time, I think most people who channel, they don't actually see or meet in the inner planes who they're channeling. So they may be channeling entities with the best intentions, but you don't really know who they are. So I always, kind of take it with a grain of salt because they don't really identify. I mean, much of what Ruth Montgomery wrote about completely did not come true. So, I mean, the future is always really dicey, and you probably kind of experience that with your time experience. Some people can kind of see the future, but then you really don't know till it happens. So that's the challenge of, living caught in time.
What I experience is that we have timelines, and so at certain points we can take different roads, and we're always the chooser. So that's why you can have, people have outcomes, and that's part behind the Mandela Effect, right? Mandela Effect? Yeah. Are you familiar with the Mandela Effect, where people remember things differently and they go, I don't know, there's a lot of them. Some people thought Mandela died in jail, and some people remember Mandela getting out and living his life to the end. But there's these different memories, and then people get confused. And they're like shared memories, and there's several things, like different things in The Wizard of Oz they remember differently, and different things about the Kennedy assassination. There's whole books on this. It appears like people are traveling down different timelines, but we converge into some kind of consensus reality periodically, and then we might branch off again and be on very similar but different variations on the theme. Anyway, I don't know if you examined that at all, but that's a study. So you have another book, and we're getting towards the last 15 minutes. Sasha, do you have anything to add or question I want to share with you?
Oh, thank you. And that was fascinating what you were telling about. I didn't really know that about Mandela, but if you want to talk, a little bit about spiritual revolution, I'd be happy to.
Do it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually my first published book, and it's basically everything you ever wanted to know about spirituality but didn't know how to ask. It's really the 52 principles of spirituality to give people a whole foundation. And I wrote it, it's a very different book I wrote as succinctly as possible. And I can read some of the chapters if you'd like.
Yes.
Embrace the fact that you're going to die. Discover what you, quote, you, unquote, is going to die. Ask others for forgiveness. Ask, what is my purpose for being here? Remember the Spirit Supreme. Transcend the boundaries of race, religion, and who is right. Treat everyone lovingly. Thank God for all your gifts. Don't look for true happiness and peace in the world. Look for it within. Do not look for the Lord in a church or temple. Look for the Lord within you. And the 10th chapter is seek and ye shall find. So I do have a number of quotes from the Bible, which I explain in the book. But really, this can kind of give you a whole course of spirituality in a very handy guide. It's really ideal for seekers of any ilk.
I love it. Sign me up.
Okay. Well, there is an ebook available, and it's still in print after 19 years. So
wow.
This was I lost the information in a move, but in the early days of the internet, I found that the leading Australian metaphysical bookshop had a list of the 10 most important metaphysical books, and this was on the list along with the Bible and other other books. So I'm glad I had the opportunity to write it. I never planned to. These spiritual books, I never planned. They just happen, you know.
When did you write this?
The book I'm working on. I'm sorry, what?
So, Spiritual Revolution, what year was that written? I might have had that. It looks familiar looking at the cover.
1997 it was published.
Uh-huh.
And then Bliss, which is about the essential spiritual virtues, came out in 99. Mm-hmm. And then I was doing all kinds of other writing, and my parents were ill and dying, and I moved from the Bay Area to Palm Springs. So there was quite a big gap between Bliss and In Search of Lost Lives. But I do have a new book that's coming along. Well, hopefully it'll come out next year. And I think this will really help people to help themselves, particularly like during times like this, where we can get into all kinds of weird spaces. This is really going to empower people. It's going to empower their nobler selves. So this is something I never would have taken on, but sort of like my higher consciousness said, this is what's next, so I kind of have to follow my guidance.
What's it called?
So the nobler self, past nobler self.
Yes. I actually don't give out titles till it's really being published, but it has a wonderful title and subtitle, and you will know about it when it's ready to come out, whenever that time arrives. I'm really excited about it. It's going to be very accessible to people and really helpful, and it's really going to empower them. It's going to help them attain more wisdom in their lives.
So when do you think it'll be out?
I would hope by next spring. I mean, a lot depends on what's happening in the world, in the economy, and publishing. But it's nearing completion, I think. But I'm just kind of the conduit. It's not on my time frame. However I'm guided, I just, I'm the kind of writer. If I need to revise something 20 times, I'm happy. I'm mainly a writer rather than a self-promoter. So I just love writing and being in that process. So whenever it feels complete, it'll get published. But it's it's all written, and I'm just editing it.
You're editing it, yeah.
So I would love to meet you guys. Eventually, you're on Maui, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Where are you?
When we get through COVID, I said we all have to get through COVID. We're in Maui, and we're all down, and we're in lockdown, and I don't think they're letting planes coming from the mainland much. You have to be worker and all that stuff. So I don't know how long that's going to work, but going to be in effect. But it seems like things are getting worse before they get better. So
right.
So you have an access to any future lives, which would be, in that movie On a Clear Day You Can See Forever, where Barbara Streisand access to her future life. You haven't accessed anything like that. what might be?
Well, interestingly, I've been asked that before, and interestingly, no, because I don't think there are any future lives on the physical. That's what I get. As far as I know, I'm going to leave with no attachments that will bring me back here. So
okay.
I think this is it, which I'm grateful for. But most people are meant to continue and have wonderful things to experience and to contribute and to grow love in the world. I mean, many people are meant to be reformers and to help improve things. I mean, we were talking about the souls who come down on special missions. I'm of a different ilk. I'm here to complete my physical experience and continue in the spiritual realms.
So if you go into spiritual, so you don't think you'll go into any other form on other planets, in other dimensions, other vibratory frequencies?
Well, I will ascend to higher realms. I mean, you can divide the spiritual realms in many ways, but teachers and saints typically kind of talk about, the 5 main planes, from the astral, the causal, the Parbrahm, which is often called Daswan Dwar, to Banwar Gufa, to Sachkhand, which is purely spiritual. The realms have increasingly greater spiritual composition and less mental. So like the causal plane or Trikuti has a greater spiritual composition. It's far more beautiful and luminous. And you can do all kinds of things mentally in these planes. You can create things automatically, just mentally. So it's quite a different existence, but you can probably also go in and meet famous people. I mean, if that's what your attachment is. So everything is possible in the creation. I mean, this is what is so mind-boggling. And desire is really the juice that runs the creation. I mean, if you want to come back and help underprivileged children, that will happen at some point, if that is a desire. But, when desires become strong enough, they kind of congeal into karma. That's how I like to express it. So it's really, the world is your oyster. I mean, what your goals are, you can accomplish, if not this life, in between lives or in a future life.
So I've always said to
go ahead.
Flames. I've always said to Sasha that we are twin flames, that I'm my soulmates, like you call, what was that term you used? Anyway, they're soulmates, those with whom you tend to incarnate, and you have, sometimes your parent, child, or lovers, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But are you familiar with the term twin flame? And if so, what do you think that is? And is that, I think Sasha's my twin flame.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the whole question.
What do you think about the twin flame concept as
the
opposed
twin
to
flame,
soulmate?
You mean like souls being divided, like what Plato wrote about?
Yeah,
your
twin.
I don't really subscribe to it. I do believe, if you've had all kinds of different incarnations with a particular mind-soul entity, they're probably in what I would call your cohort, your group. And somebody who you may think is a soulmate is somebody you've had a number of lives with already, and you're familiar with them. Like, I don't talk about soulmates in my book. I do describe what I call 3 great loves, and they're people that I had all kinds of different lives with, none of them in which we had a sexual relationship. We were relatives, we were friends, we were student and teacher, but then that particular life we came in and we were meant for each other. We had this ease of communication and a total connection. So what, people might call a soulmate, I might call a great love, but I don't really ascribe that, we were split into male and female parts, but that could be true. I mean, everything is possible in the creation. It's just that I have not recovered that. I haven't experienced it. But somebody you feel is your soulmate is just someone you've had many intimate lives with, and now you're going to be joined as a couple. And it's easy because you're familiar, And, I have an intuitive friend, and she knows she's incarnated with her husband many times. They've been, right. Once they were a nun and a priest, all kinds of different relationships, but they've been together many times. And that's true. I believe it.
Okay, we're running out of time here, so the last 2 minutes to you, unless Sasha has something real quick to say.
No, this is fine. It's interesting in a way to think that the in a holographic universe where there's fractals of everything we're calling past and future, where do they exist? Perhaps they exist right now. Where is the future? It's in our hopes and expectations. Where is the past? It's in our memories. Where do those exist? They exist now here.
Very well said. Yes.
Last words to you, Michael. Take it away.
I'm sorry, what?
Last words to you. We're almost out of time. Finish off the show.
I would want everyone to be grateful for all the gifts they've been given and to honor the divine within themselves and everyone. And this human life is the most precious gift you could ever have, and to make best use of it and to seek as best as you can with love.
That's awesome.
Oh.
And what's your website?
What's my what?
Website.
Oh, my website is Goddart.com. That's spelled G-O-D, God, and Dart, D-A-R-T, Goddart.com. And there are interviews and free media and essays and chapters you can access and download.
Okay, which book should they start with?
Whichever they're pulled to. Use your intuition. If you're interested in your march through time, spiritual evolution, I would say In Search of Lost Lives. If you want to get a really wonderful foundation of spirituality, read Spiritual Evolution. If you want to work and empower your essential spiritual strengths and virtues, I would suggest Bliss. And when the new book comes out, I would definitely even suggest to start with that, because that will be very empowering.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
Your body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move. Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid.
Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven.